Hi, Shannon Rowe Jackson here from Caution Artists at Play, and today I am going to be showing you how I did my most recent Inktense piece that is of apples and leaves in a tree. And this is actually going to be part one of two different videos. In this one, I am going to be talking mostly about the leaves. In the next, I will be talking more about the apples themselves. And this is going to be, it's kind of sped up really fast right now, but there will be some slower parts when I get to the more detailed leaves so you can see more easily what I am doing. So because of the fact that there's just so much footage and everything else, this really is not a step-by-step tutorial or anything like that. This is more me giving you tips on how I use Inktense and the versatility of Inktense to create realism or realistic leaves so that you can apply what I have talked about to your own work. However, I am thinking about doing some more like basic lessons where I can slow it down a little bit and just teach some of the basics. So if that's something that you're interested in for this medium, let me know in the comments so that I can do something like a little bit more for beginners or people who are very new to the medium. So I am using both the blocks and the pencils for this. Right now you see me using a water brush to create that stem. And basically I started out looking at the negative shapes in my reference photo and drawing the background first. So I drew the leaves that were farther away first, and then I'm coming forward to do the more detailed leaves. And it's important to note that when you are trying to do anything realistic, variation is key. You want to vary your values, meaning you want to have your darkest darks, your lightest lights, and everything in between. But you also want to kind of vary color, vary line weight, and vary your edges. And what I mean by this is that you're not going to have just hard edges. You're going to have soft edges as well. So if you look at the leaves in the background, they have softer edges. And the leaves in the foreground have harder edges. And so that's a good way to show distance. And so you'll see me working with that back and forth a lot as well. Something else to note is to vary your color. More or less the color temperature. You don't have to have the exact colors that your reference photo has, but it helps to use either contrasting colors, which are opposites on the color wheel to create emphasis, or to really just look at your warm and cool colors. Cooler colors are going to recede, warmer colors are going to come forward, so I use that a lot in this as well, and that helps show the different variations in the greens since there are so many greens in this picture. So I have a lot of warms and a lot of cools, and that helps separate them as well when going along with the varied values and the very edges. And so that's one way that I create depth in this piece, especially since it's so dense and there's so many leaves and it's all mostly green. So that is my first tip for you. And so the other thing to remember is that this is, if you're drawing something natural such as leaves or grass or anything like that, it doesn't have to be perfect. So if it's a little off, just, give yourself a little bit of a break there. I freehanded this. These don't look exactly like the reference. So we're coming into the main leaf now. So the way that I did this was, I took my water brush, which was full of water, and I swiped it across my white block, and I kind of had mixed it in a little bit with some greens. I used a cooler green for the lower side of the leaf and a warmer green for the higher side of the leaf. And this was because the lower side of the leaf is actually going to be reflecting quite a bit of sky. And that light color, that's going to be the basis for that side because that is mostly reflective, and that's what's going to give us that waxy look of the leaf. So you can probably see that I also did some indentations in the paper. I used a wooden stylus pen to do that, and basically that is just has a little metal nib on the end, and you probably saw me do that, and it just puts an indentation in the paper so that way there I can go over it with the pencils and the veins are still staying. So that's a really big tip that I have for creating leaves. And I did that even though I already had that undercolor as a base, so that way there I already had the color of the veins, because the veins are not going to be pure white. And so a lot of times when I do these leaves, I look at the color of the veins to determine what I want my undercolor to be. And I put in my undercolor using the Inktense blocks, and I use them, like I said, just kind of like a watercolor pan where I take a wet brush, swipe it over the pan, and then paint it on directly. And I have to apologize for this angle. I wanted the highlighted area to also be at the other angle, but my tripod decided to break. And the show had to go on, and I didn't have the chance to fix it before I did this part of the leaf. So I have to apologize for that. But you saw me put the underpainting in. That is basically the color, the underpainting for that side was basically that waxy color of the highlight. And I had gone back in with my greens and I didn't really like it, so I brought that color right back in, that highlight color, that mixture of the white block with just a little bit of light blue to show the reflected light from the sky, and I came back in and painted it right over it because you are able to layer Inktense. Inktense are definitely more permanent than watercolor pencils. They don't lift as easily, but sometimes they'll lift just enough to try and help fix mistakes. Basically, the main thing with that reflected light is that I did that, and then I just came in with my little shadow areas with a pencil with fine detail. And I am using heavier hand for the deeper veins with my darker pencil, and then for the little areas in between those veins, I'm using small circular motions, very, very light with a sharp pencil, so that it's not digging into the paper, and it kind of leaves like a transparent glaze, but it just gives the impression that there are some darker areas within that highlight of the leaf. And that's basically how I created that. So really, for the leaf, I put down my light color and my mid-tone first. I come through with my darker colors to create details, and then if I need to, I'll come back with a white pencil again to kind of buff up those highlights. And you'll see that repeated quite often in the rest of the more detailed leaves. So I'm going back in and doing some more of those negative shapes that I was telling you about. When you have something this detailed and you are trying to create realism, look for the abstract shapes. That's all it is. It's almost like this big puzzle. So you just want to look for those fun little shapes in between things and see if you can get those shapes in. And again, like I said, the key to realism is variation. So I'm looking for the differences between those shapes. I'm looking for the differences for the edges, for the color, and especially for the values, because I want to make sure that I have a full value range in there. I want my highlights to pop, I want my darks to complement the highlights, and I want to have my midtones in there to create form. And then of course, as I said, cooler colors are going to recede a little bit more. Warmer colors are also going to come forward. And I'm just looking at the colors of those leaves because each leaf has its own personality. So even if I don't have the exact color, if I can get the right tone and if I can get, a relative, feeling of if it's a warm or cool color, that's going to kind of show the personality of the leaf. And that is something else to consider when you're doing nature as well. And when it comes to variation, no leaf is exactly the same as the leaf next to it. They're all different, even though they're from the same tree. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller, some of them have had more sun than others, so they have, some scarring on them, or they're a little bit faded, or, some of them are beaten up a little bit. So they're all different. They'll have like the relatively same shape. Like, I don't want to throw a maple leaf in here because it's not a maple tree. However, they're not going to be perfect, so none of them are going to look exactly alike, because some of them are folded as well, and some of them are facing the sun in a different way. So here I am again doing another more detailed leaf. I did the indentation again, and as you see, I go over it with that sharp pencil, and it skips right over those lines, and those veins still stay there. Now, when I use the pan or when I wash out the pencil, a little bit of that will go into those veins, but that's okay because none of the veins are going to perfectly stick out all the time anyways. Sometimes even the vein part is going to be a little bit in shadow, but I can also come in with a sharp point of my pencil later on with my white pencil or a lighter color and pop those back out if I want to. But this is basically by me indenting those veins. I have a roadmap for where my veins are going to be. And then when I get to the darkest part of it, I come in with my pencil and use the pencil just as is. So it's a great way to use the combination of blocks and colored pencil, but you don't, or I should say Inktense pencils, but you don't have to have both. You could do all of this with just the pencils, and you could do all of it with the blocks as well, although I do enjoy having the pencils for the fine detail, because after I do all my transparent layers, because there's a lot of layers on each leaf, I do come in with the dry pencil and kind of do my final layers, and I don't wash it back out after. So I do like to use the pencils as colored pencils for the final layers, and I find that that kind of gives a nice depth, and it's really dynamic, and I'm able to get the textures that I'm looking for when I'm using it as traditional pencil. So usually my underlayers of the leaf are made with the Inktense blocks, watered down like watercolor, and then I come in later on with detail with the pencils. And there are times that once I layer the pencils on there, I will wash them back out again until I get the depth that I want, and then, as I said, I'll come in with the pencil and use it just as a pencil. So that's kind of the routine of each of these leaves. It varies a little bit. Sometimes I don't use the block. Sometimes I'll go in with the pencil and wash it out like you're seeing here. And that really wasn't necessarily preference. Sometimes I just happened to have the pencil in my hand already and was like, well, this will work perfectly fine. And you really can wash the pencil out quite a bit and smooth it out. So you don't have to have the blocks, although they are convenient and they make it a little bit faster. So there you saw me indent those veins again, going through with my transparent layer. I'm looking for my values. Half of the leaf is lighter than the other half because it's in the sun more, and that's going to create that depth and make it look folded. This video isn't sponsored by Derwent, by the way. They sent me some pencils last year, but most of them I bought myself, and the blocks I bought myself. Coming in and making it heavier with my pencils. And the waxiness, I love the white block. I used a lot of my white block for this. Perfect to create that waxiness for leaves because it's fairly opaque when you go on top of it with the white block. And so I do like that. So even if you don't want to buy a full set of blocks, I do recommend having the white block because it can make it easier to do highlights. It tends to be a little bit more opaque than the pencil just because it's so pigmented and it's so dense. And so I do recommend you can buy them open stock at, I believe you can at Jerry's and probably Blick. So if you don't want to have a full set of blocks, get the white one maybe, or maybe get a few of the colors you know that you're going to use the most just to supplement. And I'm coming in with that fine point to do those details and the little scarring of the leaves. And with those, the scarring, I kind of left it mostly white and just went in with detail. So you're seeing I have my underpainting now. I am skipping across the texture of the paper. Not that this has a huge texture because this is Arches Hot Press watercolor paper, but I am kind of skipping over some of that texture and just kind of doing little small circular motions to get that leaf texture in there. And it's not perfect. It doesn't look exactly like my reference photo, nor does it need to. So when you go and you find a reference photo that you like that has leaves, if you decide to take on leaves and use some of these tips, just keep in mind, it will not have to look exactly like the reference photo. So don't put so much pressure on yourself. Leaves are imperfect, they're natural, nobody's gonna know the difference. As long as you're making sure that you have the right shape of the leaf, you know, because it's the right breed or it's coming from the right tree, and you're just paying attention to your values and things like that, you're gonna do fine. And one thing that I do like to do is a lot of the edges, I like to clean up those edges with my white pencil, the edges of the leaves, because a lot of times they have like a little white ridge just on the edge where they hit the sunlight. And so that's something, especially for the sharper leaves that are in the front, that I try to pay attention to because it helps kind of bring them forward a little bit more and make them have that harder edge than the ones behind them. So now I'm going in and doing some more background leaves. These are mostly in shadow, and so you're not going to see any of the detail. Very easy, just looking for those abstract shapes and looking for the light versus dark, you know, the light background versus the dark leaves. And it's not pure black. I come through with some cooler greens to kind of dull those down. I don't want it to be pure black. I like to have some color mixed in with my black. I think I used a lot of neutral gray for those and some black, and then some of my cooler greens to kind of push them off into the background. And now I'm just coming in here and I'm using mostly my pencil to do this detail because it's very fine detail. And there's some variation of color in these little crinkled up leaves that are kind of stuck between these apples. And so I'm just going in and again looking for the negative shapes first and then coming through and doing the positive shapes next, washing it out with my brush. A lot of times when I do the pencils, if I'm just using the pencils, I use very light layers with a sharp pencil, small circular motions, wash it out with water, come back after it's dry, do more layers, wash it out with water again until I get to the point where I like where it's at. And it's the same if I start off with a layer from one of the blocks. It's a light layer, and then I come through after it's dry, put another layer, so on and so forth. And there are times if the paper is still a little bit damp that you can come in with a pencil, but you have to be very careful because you fill the tooth of the paper really quick when you come in with a pencil on wet paper. It can spur out. So these are things, there are techniques that you can use, especially if you really want a dense line and you want that a highly pigmented line that you don't plan on moving or anything else. You can do that. But I recommend doing that on a scrap piece of paper first before you try that technique. There are a few places here where I wanted to correct some edges, where I even dipped my pencil in a little bit of water, just the core of the pencil, not the wood part of the pencil. Like, I sharpened it really well, dipped it just slightly in water, and then came over it so I could get that hard edge. But you really want to try it on a scrap piece of paper first if you're going to try these kinds of techniques. I don't recommend dipping the wood in the water because you don't want it to damage it. And I do that very, very sparingly. And there's a few other ways that I use these. There are times when I will scribble the pencil or a block on a piece of paper or on a palette and pick up the pigment with a wet brush that way. And that works really well, and you can mix colors really easily that way as well. And then there are times, which I'll show you in the next video because I do it more for the apples, where I use my blocks almost like sumi ink. And that's where I spray the palette with water. I have a plastic palette. I spray it with water, and then I just rub my block in it ever so slightly, and a lot of pigment comes off that way. Nice thick mixture that way, and you can keep spraying it while it's on that plastic palette to keep reactivating it so you can use it over and over. I will show you that in my next video because, like I said, that I really used that technique more for the apples than I did for this. So I'm coming down and doing a leaf that's up front. Notice I did a really yellow underlayer for that because that's going to be a really warm leaf. Okay, so now I'm showing you a leaf that I did mostly in pencil because I just wanted to show you that you can do this just in pencil without the blocks if you want to. Again, I have already indented where my veins are. I'm coming through that pencil and I'm being messy, but there's going to be a lot of layers. Each one of these leaves had no less than like 5 layers. So I know that if I'm messy on the first layer, it's going to be okay because it's going to get covered. But this is giving me my mid-tone. This is giving me my base. And it's probably, it's giving me that color that I want within the veins because I've washed it into those little divots that I've made with my stylus. Went in there and cleaned up that edge like I was talking about. Went back over the veins a little bit with the white because I realized the veins on this one were a little bit of a more milky kind of look. And then I'm coming in with my stylus pen again and doing some smaller details. So you don't have to do the stylus pen first. Like if you put a base color down that you know is going to be the color of the veins, you can indent the paper after you've already done that base color. It works both ways. So I went in to do the smaller little kind of creases that are between those veins to get that detail in there. And then I'm coming through with my sharper, darker pencil. And again, I was paying attention to what color green I wanted. Not specific color, but more, was this leaf going to be warmer or cooler than the ones surrounding it? And this one's also going to have a little bit of highlighting on it. So you're going to see me come through with a brush. At this point, I have switched from my water brush to a regular brush, and this is like a generic, it's kind of like a Simply Simmons, but it's not. I don't even remember the brand of it because I buy cheap brushes. And I went, you see, I just swiped the white block and I came in to create that milky kind of texture over it so that it can show the highlights. And then I'm just coming through with those small details in between things. I'm looking for little wrinkles, just doing little lines and things like that. Very, very small details. And again, it's not exact to my reference, but I'm just mimicking the texture. That's all we really can do as artists. We're mimicking something. It's never going to be exact to the reference because it's a mimicry. it is what it is. So keep that in mind when you work on your own work, that we are all pretty much creating an illusion. That's what realism is. Actually, it's what all art is, but realism is just the illusion of something that's real. But it's just making marks on paper. And not every mark is going to be in the perfect place, but most people are not going to know the difference. Only you will know the difference as the artist. Coming in to heighten up that detail a little bit more. And this has been slowed down quite a bit. I work fairly fast anyway, so some of my pencil strokes are pretty fast. It's sped up a little, but it's definitely slower than the rest of the video, just so you can kind of get a better idea. Okay, and so this is where we're at before the apples. And as you can see, there was a lot of work in there. I hope that you enjoyed this and that you kind of learned a little bit more about how I do leaves, and that next time you decide to do your own painting that has leaves in it, it has helped you out a little bit. Let me know any questions that you have about Inktense in general, so maybe I can answer them a little bit better in the next video. And I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, please hit subscribe. Also, if you're interested in seeing more of my artwork, I'm on social media, so check out the links in the description below.